So far, we've mostly looked at dynamic properties and methods when looking at classes. So name, age, and breed are all dynamic, and so is show information. So what does it mean to be dynamic? A dynamic property is one that is unique to the instance of the class, unique to the object. So if we were to create two dog objects, my dog and your dog, they're going to have separate values for name, age, and breed. Name, age, and breed should all be unique to the object. My dog is going to have a certain name, and your dog might have the same name, but they're going to be separate. They could be different. A static property would be one that is not dependent on the actual object, one that applies to all of the different objects. So if, for example, we were to store the population of dogs in, say, a room, we could have static. We need to specify static because dynamic is going to be the default. Name, age, and breed, we haven't specified whether it's static or dynamic. The default is dynamic. So we need to say static, and then we are going to have an integer to store the population. And because this is going to be created when the class is first passed by the compiler, we should also add a default value here. So static int population equals 0. If we try to initialize this in the constructor, then it's going to be reset every time we create a new object. But we do want to do something whenever we create a new object. Whenever we create a new dog, we want to increase the population. And so if we go down to here, we can print out dog.population here. And you see I'm using the class name now instead of an object name. If I just copy this down here as well, we should see the information for both of the dogs just here and a number above and below. Now, I've done something slightly wrong, so not wrong per se, but I have output the population, and both of these populations are after we've created the dogs. So if I just move this one to here, to before we actually create the dogs, and we save this again and run it, now we should see 0 here, because this is before we create the objects. We create the objects and we show the information, and then we print out the population again, and this time we get a 2 because we've created 2 objects. And the same idea goes for methods here. So we've got show information, which is a dynamic method because we haven't specified that it's static. And we can see that this should be a dynamic method because we are using the name, the age, and the breed of a particular dog. When we call show information from my dog, it's giving us the information about my dog. And when we call show information from your dog, we output the information for your dog. So this needs to be a dynamic method. But what if we want a method or a function that doesn't depend on an object? So we could maybe have a method to output the population, or let's have a look at a different one. And let's create it in here. So let's have public static. We're going to return an integer, and let's call it add 2 nums. So we're going to add we're creating a function to add 2 numbers together. And we're going to need to take in those 2 numbers, so int a and int b. And we want to return a plus b. So here we're not depending on any objects, we're not depending on any dogs, we're not depending on any dog classes, although that's one of the different types of classes that we're going to have a look at very shortly. So we've got this add 2 numbers that doesn't depend on anything. So because we are in the same class, we can now just come under here and do add two nums without specifying any object like my dog or any class like dog.population. And let's say add 3 and 9. And that's not going to print anything out yet, so let's do that. And if we run the program, we should get 12 at the end here, just there. Okay, so a dynamic property or method is dependent on a particular object of a class. Static property or method is not. But what if we have a lot of static methods, say, that are just kind of clogging up our main class? So what if we have another function called public static int, or let's call it increment. And we're going to take in an integer and we are going to return the integer plus 1. So it's almost like we've done the exact same thing, but instead of entering a second number, we just increase by 1. So maybe we have a lot of kind of these arithmetic or mathematical functions. And what if we want to group all of these mathematical functions together? Well, that's the other purpose of a class. So if we come up here and we create a new class, let's say class maths, or math if you prefer, and let's move these into here. Okay, so you can see we can no longer use add two nums directly, but what we can do, because these are static methods, is we can use the class name and then dot and then the method name. So we could do maths dot add two nums, and this should work the exact same. And we get the output of 12 here. So the kind of most quintessential, I guess, purpose of a class is as a template in order to create an object like a dog, or it doesn't even have to be a tangible physical item like a physical being like a dog. It could also be like an appointment for the doctors or the dentist or something. But it's still kind of an idea that we are creating an instance of. The other purpose of a class, the other main purpose, is to group methods or properties together. And with that in mind, we can look at the main class and it might start to make a bit more sense. So we've got a class here that is dedicated to the core of the program. We can have other classes like maths and dog that are used within our program, but dog class is for methods and properties or functions and variables that are core to the program. For example, the main function. The main function is a static function, which means that we don't need to create an instance of dog class in order to call the main function. We can just do dog class dot main. And we as the programmer would never do this, but this is how the main function is started by something known as the JVM, the Java Virtual Machine. And so we don't need to interact with it, but that's how some things are working under the hood. We need to make this public because otherwise the JVM wouldn't have access to it. It needs to be in a public class as well, otherwise the JVM wouldn't have access to that. And we don't need to return anything back to the JVM. So that's going to be all for this video. In the next video, we're going to be looking at inheritance and polymorphism.